Welcome back to The Discoverers. This is Chapter 81, Learning from Numbers. The pioneer of modern demography, some would say too of statistics, was a prosperous London tradesman, John Graunt, 1620 to 1674, an amateur in the world of mathematics. He had no formal training in the subject, but he was bound as apprentice to a haberdasher and became a prosperous man of affairs, quote, ingenious and studious, known for his dexterous and incomparable faculty, end of quote, of making shorthand notes of sermons. He was deeply pious, experimental in religion, and a peacemaker in the faction-ridden London of the Civil War. Though raised a Puritan, he first converted to anti-Trinitarianism, then to Catholicism. He suffered disastrous losses from the Great London Fire of 1666, from which he never recouped his fortune. A down-to-earth businessman, Graunt was not concerned with the grand estimates of national wealth that occupied the, quote, political arithmeticians, end of quote, of his day. Yet he was interested in the welfare of his London community. He held numerous city offices, including councilmen. The death toll of the plague years, visible all around him, became the basis for Graunt's interest in demography and statistics. The most obviously distressing fact about the English population was the high death rate during the years of plague, some of the worst of which occurred in Graunt's lifetime. During 1625, for example, about 1/4 of the population died. As early as 1527, bills of mortality, or lists of the dead, had been occasionally collected in London, and by 1592 these regularly listed the cause of death. During the disastrous plague of 1603, the weekly bills of mortality published information gathered by searchers, ancient matrons appointed to view dead bodies, to report the cause of death, and to enforce laws of quarantine. Carrying conspicuous red wands of office, these elderly women were notorious for their ignorance of medicine, their thirst for alcoholic beverages, and their obliging readiness, for a sum, to cover up an unpleasant fact like a death from syphilis. Their reports were sold to all interested persons by the parish clerks at 10 a.m. on Thursdays at a penny per sheet, or by subscription at 4 shillings per year. Graunt, quote, knew not by what accident, end of quote, his thoughts were engaged by the bills of mortality. A practical man, he was puzzled that so many facts so regularly collected had been put to so little use. His friend, the pioneer economist William Petty, 1623 to 1687, probably encouraged his curiosity. On February 5th, 1662, Dr. Daniel Whistler, a medical doctor, distributed to a meeting of the Royal Society 50 copies of a 90-page booklet by John Graunt that had come off the press only 2 weeks before. He proposed Graunt for election to fellowship, and the society promptly voted Graunt the honor, which was unprecedented for a mere businessman. King Charles II, endorsing Graunt, urged the society that, quote, if they found any more such tradesmen, they should be sure to admit them without any more ado, end of quote. The new international community of science was opening its doors. Graunt hoped modestly that his short pamphlet with a long name, Natural and Political Observations mentioned in a following index and made upon the bills of mortality, with reference to the government, religion, trade, growth, air, diseases, and the several changes of the said city, that's the whole title, might earn him representation in what he called the Parliament of Nature. His work made no cosmic claims. All he had done was, quote, to have reduced several great confused volumes of bills of mortality into a few perspicuous tables, and abridged such observations as naturally flowed from them into a few succinct paragraphs, without any long series of multiloquous deductions, end of quote. From, quote, these poor despised bills of mortality, that ground which hath laid waste these 80 years, Graunt gained much pleasure in deducing so many abstruse and unexpected inferences. There is pleasure in doing something new, though never so little, without pestering the world with voluminous transcriptions, end of quote. Graunt was undaunted by the crudity of the available data, and at the very outset offered 106 numbered observations. refusing to concede that the ineptness of the quote-unquote searchers had made their product useless, he was ingenious at squeezing out hypotheses. Even where searchers were known to be tempted, quote, after the mist of a cup of ale and the bribe of a 2-groat fee instead of one, end of quote, to list what was really a death from French pox as a death from consumption, he used this fact to add interest to the lists. After grouping together similar facts from all the 7 decades recorded in the bills of mortality, he then compared the findings for different groups. Grant noted, for example, that only 2 persons in 9 died of acute diseases, 70 in 229 of chronic diseases, and only 4 of 229 of, quote, outward griefs, end of quote, that is, cancers, sores, broken bones, leprosy, etc. 7% died of old age, while some diseases and casualties kept a constant proportion. Fewer than 1 in 2,000 was murdered in London. Not more than 1 in 4,000 died of starvation. Quote, the rickets is a new disease, both as to name and thing, from 14 dying thereof. Anno 1634, it hath gradually increased to above 500, anno 1660. End of quote. He probably was unaware that physicians at the time were looking anew at this disease. There were more males than females in England, and though, quote, physicians have 2 women patients to 1 man, yet more men die than women, end of quote. The fall was the most unhealthful season, but some diseases, spotted fever, smallpox, and dysentery, or, quote, plague in the guts, end of quote, were equally menacing all through the year. London was not so healthful now as it once was. While the population of the English countryside would double by procreation only once every 280 years, the population of London would double every 70 years. Quote, the reason whereof is that many of the breeders leave the country, and that the breeders of London come from all parts of the country, such persons breeding in the country almost onely as were born there, but in London multitudes of others. End of quote. He denied the superstition that plague came with the coronation of a king, for in 1660, when Charles II was crowned, there was no plague. His most original invention was his new way to present population and mortality by calculating survivorship in a life table, starting with 2 simple facts: the number of births that survived to 6 years of age, 64 of 100, and the number surviving to age 76, 1 of 100. He made a table showing the number of survivors in each of the 6 intervening decades. At 16 years, 40. At 26, 25. At 36, 16. At 46, 10. At 56, 6. At 66, 3. At 76, 1. At 80, 0. While modern actuaries do not accept his numbers, his table of survivorship opened the modern epoch in demography. Grant concluded his pamphlet was a prophetic plea for statistics. Quote, moreover, if all these things were clearly and truly known, which I have but guessed at, it would appear how small a part of the people work upon necessary labors and callings, viz., how many women and children do just nothing, only learning to spend what others get. How many are mere voluptuaries, and, as it were, mere gamesters by trade? How many live by puzzling poor people with unintelligible notions in divinity and philosophy? How many by persuading credulous, delicate, and litigious persons that their bodies or estates are out of tune and in danger? How many by fighting as soldiers? How many by trades of mere pleasure or ornaments? And how many in a way of lazy attendance, etc., upon others? And on the other side, how few are employed in raising and working necessary food and covering? And of the speculative men, how few do truly study nature and things? End of quote. We know of no public national census before the 18th century. Whatever figures there were that revealed a nation's military and economic power were guarded as state secrets, like the maps of newly discovered passages through dangerous waters to distant ports. It seems that the ancient population counts among the Egyptians, Greeks, Hebrews, Persians, Romans, and Japanese were targeted on taxable people and property, hearths and households, and men of military age. The earliest recorded comprehensive census of a population and its food supply was taken in Nuremberg in 1449, when the town was threatened by a siege. The town council ordered a full count of all the mouths to be fed and an inventory of the food supply, but the results were kept secret and did not become public till 2 centuries later. Public numbers are a modern byproduct of new ways of thinking about government, about wealth, and, of course, about science. Representative governments have required periodic public censuses of population. The framers of the Constitution of the United States pioneered with their provision, Article 1, Section 2, for a national census every 10 years. The United States Census of 1790 began the oldest continuous periodic census of a nation and became a model for the institution elsewhere. Even earlier, the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776 provided for regular censuses. During the Revolution, the Committee of the Continental Congress in 1776 that was delegated to draw up the Articles of Confederation required a census every 3 years. Although each colony, regardless of population, was to have one vote in the Congress of the Confederation, each state was to be taxed in proportion to its property. The number of inhabitants seemed, in John Adams' phrase, quote, a fair index of wealth, end of quote. The familiar compromise in Philadelphia in 1787 between the large and the small states produced a 2-chamber Congress with a Senate, in which each state had 2 votes, and a House of Representatives, where representation was by the numbers of the people. The country was growing rapidly by immigration, and people were on the move. Without an up-to-date census, how could they know that they were equally represented? Reasons of national security had not been the only medieval obstacles to publishing data on births and deaths and longevity. The length of different human lives was long believed to be the proper concern only of God. Not until the mid-17th century did the English word insurance begin to have its modern meaning. As late as 1783, a French writer boasted that though life insurance was permitted in Naples and Florence and in England, it was not allowed in France, where human life was considered too sacred to be a subject of wager. But ingenious theologians found a way around. John Ray himself had offered some clues in his popular Wisdom of God in 1691. Following his lead, another member of the Royal Society, William Durham, 1657 to 1735, an expert on clocks who had already proved that nature must be the work of a divine clockmaker, went on in his Physico-Theology in 1713 to explain how the facts of population confirmed the divine design. Quote, how is it possible, by the bare rules and blind acts of nature, Durham asked, that there should be a tolerable proportion, for instance, between male and female, end of quote. The surplusage of males, he said, which calculated at about 14 to 13, was so, quote, very useful for the supplies of war, end of quote, for the Navy and other purposes, that it must plainly be, quote, the work of the one that ruleth the world, end of quote. Quote, it is a very remarkable act of divine providence that useful creatures are produced in great plenty and others in less, end of quote. Durham noted with satisfaction that poisonous reptiles were most plentiful in heathen lands. Quote, thus the balance of the animal world is throughout all ages kept even and by a curious harmony and just proportion between the increase of all animals and the length of their lives. The world is through all ages well but not overstored. One generation passeth away and another cometh, end of quote. To avoid overpopulation, God had wisely reduced the biblical age of man first down to 120 and then to 70. Quote, by this means the peopled world is kept at a convenient stay, neither too full nor too empty, end of quote. And there we will pause for the end of part 1.